Okay, is the camera on? I can't tell if the camera's on or not. Can't tell if it's on. If the camera's, hopefully it's on. If the camera's not on, I will speak loudly. If the camera's not on, I'll speak loudly so you can hear me from wherever you're at. By the way, I am Brian Lee Durfee, author of The Forgetting Moon and The Blackest Heart, both published by Simon & Schuster's Saga Press. Today, I'm going to be talking about why fantasy fans and fantasy writers should also be reading the classics. You know, this spring, I've been on a little bit of a binge of rereading a lot of the classics, along with a lot of horror novels. So we're getting a lot of classic novel reviews and a lot of horror novel reviews on my channel lately. But I wanted to do this series of why fantasy fans and fantasy writers should be reading, mystery novels, thrillers, westerns, romance novels, historical fiction, nonfiction, classics. Because if we're writers, especially epic fantasy, if we want to know how to write, I believe great writing starts with great reading. If you are reading great books, even if you're reading shitty books, you can learn something from what I am a published author with Simon & Schuster. I have no degree in writing. I've never taken a creative writing class in my life. I'm just a carpet cleaner that became a prison guard that just decided to write books. Everything I know about writing is what I have gleaned off of reading close to 5,000 or 6,000 books in my life. Just reading a lot, and you read a lot and you will learn. You will learn by osmosis how to create great sentences, how stories should flow, all of this, and you can especially learn a lot from the classics like War and Peace or Les Mis or any of the dozens of others. And I'm going to just give you an example right now. When I read Moby Dick, this is the first lesson for you writers out there. For you readers, you can get some enjoyment out of the classics, and that's all I'm going to tell you. For you readers, you fantasy readers, read some classics, you'll enjoy it. For you writers, now let's see what we can learn from classic novels. One of the first classic novels I ever read was Moby Dick, and it got me interested in whaling. In fact, all the chapters about the captain trying to find the white whale were kind of boring to me, but when we got to the history of whaling and how to kill a whale, how to hunt a whale, how to skin a whale, how to take the blubber out of a whale, how to do all of this, how to survive on a whaling ship and everything about the whaling ships, man, I was glued to it. That was like a history lesson in whaling, and it inspired me to write my own scene in The Forgetting Moon based off of what I had learned about whaling and the adventures of whaling, and I just thought it was fantastic. And so when you read these classic novels, you're reading about people that lived in another time and era and led different lives than us. When you read these stuff, Herman Melville wrote this Moby Dick thing a long time ago, and he described it in the terminology that was used in that era. And that's the next point. Other than just the research that's been done in a lot of these things, if you want to learn about, Victorian England, Charles Dickens, if you want to learn about windmills in Spain, Don Quixote. There's so much that you can learn. So much research has been done just because the person is writing about the time in which he lived, and so it's just there. It's just built into the story automatically, and you can learn so much from that. Now, when we read these things, not only do we have historical record of great things that have happened, like whaling or War and Peace, the Russian Napoleonic Wars, or the French Revolution. It's just, the research is just in the pages because they're writing about times that they lived. Not only that, but they're using a language of the time in which they lived. And when you're writing classic fantasy, if you want I don't care if your fantasy is set in Asia or Africa or the typical European setting, If you can use some of the word choices that these old masters used, some of the way that they spoke and some of the way that they wrote, if you can sort of mimic that in your books, it will make your own epic fantasy seem as if it is written in a specific time period. It will give you the essence and flavor of an ancient civilization. So when you read these things, I know that some of them can be a slog in the way that they're written. And we don't want to make your books a slog in the way that they're written, but we want to cultivate the parts of it that we can that are written beautifully and put them in our fast-paced. We want to intermingle all of it, because I'm telling you, you read War and Peace, or you read Les Mis, or you read Jane Austen, or the Bronte sisters, or you read Thomas Hardy, any of these guys, Herman Melville, Huckleberry Finn. Read all of that and just see the way these guys are constructing their sentences. Understand that it's old-timey language, and pick and choose what parts of that you want to put into your epic fantasy, and it will make your epic fantasy seem as if it's written by someone who lived in another time and age. I promise you that. And you don't have to write exactly like these people. You can intermingle, you can intersperse these words and phrases and all of that. And another thing is like I said, these are written in the time of sword fights and castles. And you can understand how to describe those things, because they wanted to describe those things, and you need to describe that kind of stuff in your writing. So that's what I'm saying. Research. These classic novels are great they're just great reads. Not only that, we didn't even talk about theme, how these guys interspersed theme throughout their stories. And that's another thing that you can kind of you can take their themes and how they interlace their themes throughout their stories. In the classics, more modern day writers, they do it a little bit more slick. The classics, it can be a little more clunky and maybe hitting you over the head. But you can always learn something from what's going on by these writers that lived a long time ago. I mean, why wouldn't you want to educate yourself on everything? Like I said, we've talked about reading modern day thrillers for their pacing, mysteries for how to construct a great mystery. We've talked about westerns for a lot of the same reasons we're talking about these classics. We've talked about nonfiction. We've talked about all of it, pretty much romance, how human relationships work. Reading War and Peace or Anna Karenina, you can learn how human relationships work just from reading, because we're all the same, whether we lived in the 18th century or 19th century Russia to right now. We're all the same people with our relationships. We all suffer through the same loves and heartbreaks that Anna Karenina did, and so that's why it's just fascinating, just from a philosophical and gee whiz point of view, just to read some of these books and be like, hey, those people back then, they weren't that different from me. They weren't that different from me. So anyway, that's my advice on why fantasy fans and fantasy writers should read the classics.